Welcome to the Foundations of Learning podcast, where we believe every child deserves a tailored and enriching educational experience. By embracing diverse perspectives and sharing practical tips, I hope to inspire you to actively participate in your child's learning journey, fostering a love for knowledge and nurturing the skills necessary for success in a rapidly changing world. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Foundations of Learning podcast. Today, we're going to go down some rabbit holes because as a nation, we are failing our kids. Our school system is not great. Our kids are not reading. They are not doing basic math. They have more chronic disease than ever before. They have more cognitive delays and mental disorders than ever before. There is something happening, and it's not just because we're getting better at diagnosing these things. At least that is my own opinion as an educator that has seen many kids come through my class. And I can promise you that if you had kids that had, any sort of cognitive delay or mental disorder or whatever, you would notice, you can notice these things. So I don't believe it's just that we're getting better at diagnosing these. I think there is a serious problem and we need to figure out what that is. So today I'm going to kind of talk about why our system is failing, what is going on with the education system. Why can't kids read? Why can't they do math at a very basic level? Why are more and more kids acting out in school and having these aggressive behaviors and, being put on these behavioral plans for IEPs and 504s and things like that, and how it's affecting everyone's ability to learn, not just these kids that need extra help, but also the normal just gen ed kids. And there are some things that I believe are contributing to that, which is the use of our technology, how they're using technology, our nutrition, our sedentary lifestyle, and the lack of proper instruction in things like reading and mathematics that we objectively know don't work. So we are going to get into it. The very first statistic I want to talk about is that the CDC actually just stated that 1 in 6 U.S. children aged 2 to 8 years old had a diagnosed mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. 1 in 6. So if you look at this as if you're looking at a classroom, right? And you're seeing 1 in 6 children aged 2 to 8, which this is when they're learning so much, right? The foundational skills that they need in learning life skills, social skills, academic skills, and so on. If you have 1 in 6 and you have a class of 24, that is 4 kids in every single classroom that has some sort of diagnosed mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. That's insane. And I have talked to teachers that have worked in schools for over 20 years, and they all agree that behaviors, mental disorders, developmental disorders have all increased. This is not something that we're just better at diagnosing. No, the kids have changed. There are things that are changing, and I've talked to educators why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? And some of them say technology, some of them say nutrition, some of them say, bad parenting or whatever. There are so many different theories on what it is, but I honestly think that it is a correlation of everything. And I don't think that we can really pinpoint one thing or the other. However, I do think, like I said, it's a combination of all things. If you are an educator and you're listening to this podcast, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have been in the education system for years and years and years and years, and you have data points of, how many kids you have in your class that are either destroying your class, you have to evacuate your classroom, or whatever it is, right? Or more children on IEPs or 504s or whatever it is. Tell me in the comments, have you seen this change? Have you seen this shift? What do you think it is? Do you think that it's technology, nutrition? What do you think it is? So the next statistic that I'm going to give is crazy. It is so alarming. And the reason I'm talking about this today too, I kind of want to give some background on that, is I have been seeing on social media a lot of educators talking about kids destroying their room, having to evacuate the classrooms. I'm seeing news articles of teachers literally getting injured or killed from being beat to death or whatever it is. It's honestly a little bit crazy that this is happening. And as well as my own experience in my last year of teaching last year, I quit because I was so overwhelmed with the situation that I was put into with some students that were in my class, and I fought to the end for these kids to have full-time aides because the general education setup of how school is set up, they were not thriving, and it was causing me to evacuate my room a lot. It was causing me to feel like I couldn't teach my students and that nobody was winning here, right? I wasn't winning. The students that had needed more accommodations were not winning. The general education students were not winning. Nobody in this situation was winning, and I fought and fought and fought for more accommodation for these kids. And every time I was told no, or we don't have the resources for it, or we don't have the people for it, we don't have whatever their excuses were, or with time we'll figure this out. And as I'm here trying to make sure that my students are learning and that these other kids that need these accommodations are also learning. And it really it was my breaking point. Like, I realized that every district is so similar. Every school is very similar. Yes, there are differences depending upon where you are at, no doubt. But however, the way that the system works is going to be the same majority of the time. And it was frustrating for me, and it just made me sad. Like, their actions, like their words are, we want to help the kids, like it's all for the kids. And then their actions are not that way. Basically, as a teacher, you're told that you're crazy or that you just suck at your job or whatever else it is but it's always on you. It's your fault, and you're, whatever, we're going to ignore you. And you wonder why so many teachers are leaving the profession. Well, I mean, one, yes, you don't get paid great. Two, you're gaslit all the time, told you suck at your job or whatever it is, or you're the problem and, you're getting beat to death, but well, you should have done X, Y, and Z. It's your fault, right? So it's like, I can see the burnout. And I was one of those teachers that was, the statistic of the burnout. So I'm going to give you another statistic. It was done by the National Center for Education Statistics. It says, over 80% of schools report that student behavior has worsened significantly in recent years. Okay, now listen to these percentages, because this is freaking wild. So the National Center for Education Statistics published a study in 2022 that helped explain the teacher burnout statistics of 2023. There is an increase in classroom disruptions from student misconduct, up 56%. So this is what schools are reporting. That is up 56%. The rowdiness outside of the classroom is up 49%, and acts of disrespect toward teaching staff is up 48%. This is not something that is just like, oh, this just happened to me. No, this is happening to educators all over. And I have personal relationships with some people that their children are in a situation where their classroom is getting evacuated all the time, and there are lockdowns and whatever. And these are elementary school kids, okay? Like, this isn't high school, junior high, whatever. This is elementary school levels. What is happening? Like, why all of a sudden are we seeing this? So let's really quickly look, because I had said that 1 in 6 U.S. children aged 2 to 8 had been diagnosed with a mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. So what does that mean? Well, developmental disorder, it's as you would think, right? They're not developing at the rate of normal kids, right? Either that be socially, academically. So you're thinking like things like autism or oral language disorders, like things like that, right? They're not developing in the appropriate rate as a normal kid would, okay? So what is a behavioral disorder? Well, this is a definition from APA.org, any persistent and repetitive pattern of behavior that violates societal norms or rules, seriously impairs a person's functioning, or creates distress in others. The term is used in a very general sense to cover a wide range of disorders or syndromes. So very general. I don't know. If you don't meet societal norms or rules, then you have a behavioral disorder. So very general. So then you're probably wondering, well, what is a mental disorder? From the WHO. A mental disorder is characterized by a clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, or behavior. It is usually associated with distress or impairment in important areas of functioning. There are many different types of mental disorders. So again, kind of a general sense of like, well, there's many different kinds. Okay. So we have developmental disorders, we have behavioral disorders, and we have mental disorders. We have so many kids that have these issues. It has to be something going on with our brain, right? Like it has to be that our brain is missing nutrients. Maybe it's the chemicals, maybe it's, I don't know, like what's going on, right? So then I was like, okay, well, let's think like, what do we feed these kids when they're in school and things like that? Or what do they say on the food pyramid or the food plate, I guess now you would say, right? And what we should be eating. Well, mostly what they say is wrong. And so let's look. I'm looking at the USDA. This is their meal program and what they have to feed the kids. So here it is. We have, for grades K through 5, they should have at least a cup of fruit or a cup of vegetables. And the vegetables could be dark green, red, orange, beans and peas, starchy or other. Grains, they need to have 7 to 10 ounces of. Meat or meat alternatives, 0. So no protein, just fruits or vegetables, some grains, and then milk, but it needs to be non-fat. So non-fat milk, so no fat, no protein. Basically, we're feeding them some vitamins and minerals from the fruits and veggies, and lots of sugar and carbs. That's what we're feeding the kids. So now let's look at, okay, what does our brain need? Like to have a brain that is going to thrive and to develop correctly, what nutrients does our brain actually need? What is it made up of, right? So the first thing I want to talk about is because I'm going to show you 2 drastically different studies. One of the studies I'm going to talk about was done by Clinical Connection at Hopkins Medicine. And then I'm going to talk about multiple studies that somebody named Sean Stevenson talked about on his podcast. He's a nutritionist, like a dietitian type person. He's also an author. He wrote Eat Smarter. If you have not read the book Eat Smarter, I highly suggest it. It is so good. And he goes over so many statistics and so many studies. And he really dives into what our bodies need, what our bodies are made of. And it is just a really good book. So if you want to get your health in check or your nutrition in check, like I would highly recommend reading Eat Smarter. Anywho, so I'm going to talk about 2 different studies because I think it is so important when we are looking at like, okay, like how should I be eating? How should I be doing X, Y, and Z? You have to look at the study. You have to identify who paid for the study for one, because that can get really, really sticky really fast. And what kind of study was it? Like, control groups and all of that stuff. Like you have to look at so many different things when you're looking at studies, but I'm going to go to this first study done by the Hopkins Medicine. .org. Before I go over this study though, I do want to mention that studies show that nutrition affects the brain development and mental well-being of children more than adults. Okay. So keep that in mind. So here we are, Hopkins Medicine. In a bid to further explore how a mother-to-be's diet might affect her offspring's brain health, Johns Hopkins Medicine researchers have found that pregnant and nursing rats fed high-fat diets have offspring that grow up to be slower than expected learners and that have persistently abnormal levels of the components needed for healthy brain development and metabolism. In the experiments, pregnant rats were allowed to overeat repeatedly a diet similar in fat to that of a typical fast food meal that people eat. Okay, well, obviously that's not going to be very good because you think about the seed oils they use in fast food and the crap food that they feed you, it's like the lowest quality. So obviously, although the study was performed on animals, the researchers say their findings described in the August issue of Experimental Neurology likely apply in some measure to other mammals, including humans. And they add to evidence that unhealthy diets may damage a fetus's developing brain in specific ways. Because so much of mammalian brain biology and metabolism is similar, the research may well hold warnings for people that high-fat diets during pregnancy are a concern. So they just said that it's a fast food meal, but now they're saying it's a high-fat diet. Okay, anyway, let's keep reading. Says Kelly Tomashiro, PhD, MS, Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Pregnant moms who may not have access to fresh foods or healthy diets may have their unborn children's brain development suffer, and there's an opportunity to intervene to change their offspring's learning trajectory to a better one. I agree. Tamara Shira's laboratory studies how during pregnancy, stress, diet, and the immune system can contribute to a psychiatric and metabolic diseases such as diabetes. During the current study, which focused on the impact of a high-fat diet on the developing brain, they fed pregnant rats a diet of 60% calories from fat in their food pellets throughout pregnancy and until their pups were finished weaning, a period of 3 weeks. The typical American and Western European diet has about 45% calories from fat. The researchers compared the rats' high-fat food to a fast food diet. Okay, there are a couple of things in here that are very contradictory. Okay, you have that they're saying that it may well hold warnings for people that high-fat diets during pregnancy are a concern. No, it matters the type of fats you're eating. If you're eating a crap ton of vegetable oil, yeah, no, not going to be great. Not going to be good for you. Like, we have proven that it is not good for you. Fat is not the enemy. It's the type of fat that is the enemy. Now we're going to go into a different perspective. We just looked at that study. They said high fat, bad for your child's developing brain. Okay. No wonder the USDA says, hey, no fat, no protein in your kids' diets at school. That's bad for their brains. Well, let's look at another perspective. So this is Sean Stevenson on brain health. Okay. This is his podcast where he's going through a bunch of studies and what our brain is made up of and what it needs. Okay. So everything you eat does not directly go to your brain, even though your brain, now I really want you to get this, it's only about 2% of your body's mass, but it consumes about 25% to 30% of the calories you consume. You have a hungry, ravenous brain. What you eat directly, your brain is getting first dibs. So what you put in there matters, but there are specific nutrients that are able to get into your brain and to feed those brain cells. Okay. So then he goes in to talk about like the fact that our brain is actually like 80% water. It is like this mushy, watery thing. So he talked about how the most powerful of all the macronutrients, because it makes up most of your body and your body's performance, is water. Now, we're not just talking about water. We also need to make sure that the water has electrolytes, right? It needs to have magnesium. It needs to have sodium, and not just any type of sodium, because he does go into talking about that not all sodium is made equal. So when he's mentioning sodium, he says that there is a study that he highlights in the book, Eat Smarter, and its researchers at McGill University found that sodium literally functions as an on or off switch in the brain for specific neurotransmitters that support optimal function and protect the brain against numerous diseases. This is how important these electrolytes are. It's like an on or off switch for your brain to actually do the processes and protect itself. So then he goes into also magnesium and how magnesium is super important. So if you are like getting, those electrolytes like Liquid IV or Prime or whatever, right? Those are going to have the minerals that you need in your water, because our water, they do all of the things to clean our water and they take out all the minerals and they put some minerals back in, but it's still not enough. So we need to make sure that we are getting those minerals because, like I said, our brain is 80% water. Okay. The other part of what our brain is fat and protein, and then a little bit of carbs. So he kind of breaks it down into the percentages of like how much of each thing it is. Your brain is about 11% fat, followed closely by about 8% proteins, 3% minerals, and a little sprinkling of the carbs and other compounds, because the carbohydrate or sugar molecules that are floating around in the body, your brain uses that stuff very quickly. So as you can see, the most important thing, fat, protein, minerals, and some carbs. But when you look back at what we're feeding the kids, it is all carbs, all sugar, no proteins, no fats. How is that helping a developing brain? Well, sounds like it's not, and it sounds like it's not going to help their brain develop very well. So when we're looking at fats, like I had said, fats matter. So then he goes into talking about the types of fats, and the type of fat that your brain actually needs is called a structural fat. A lot of the structural fats are actually developed and infused into our brains when we're babies, specifically saturated fat, critical to brain development. So we have to have saturated fat, although saturated fat has been villainized, right? The brain is sopping up saturated fats like a biscuit. When you're a baby, mother's milk is upwards of 50% saturated fat. Did nature make a mistake? Saturated fat's been vilified and vindicated, and vilified and vindicated. And then even now, recently, you came out again, saturated fats. It's going to kill you, right? Like that study we just read about fat. It's bad for you, right? But there is a big difference between saturated fats found in processed foods and also saturated fats found in nature. Right off the bat, the differentiation is typically not made when you hear these studies about how bad saturated fat is. Saturated fat is primarily going to feed the developing human brain, the most complex, powerful entity in the known universe. Now, here's the rub. Those receptors or those channels to allow saturated fat into the human brain through the blood-brain barrier when you are an infant and then moving into early childhood, they're open. So it's so important that your child is getting enough fat. But as time goes on, those receptors and the accessibility in the human brain to absorb saturated fats in the brain itself goes down until reach adulthood. They're all but shut off. But saturated fat is so important that the human brain will make it itself. Your brain as an adult, if it needs to, will make saturated fat. He cited a study published in the Journal of Neurology using MRIs, and it revealed that people consuming the lowest amount of EPA and DHA in their diets had accelerated brain shrinkage. Their brains were literally shrinking. We have to protect our brains and provide these essential nutrients. So EPA and DHA, they stated in the study that people who ate the least amount of DHA, which was less than 4 grams in this study, showed the highest rate of brain shrinkage, while those who ate 6 grams or more had the healthiest shrink-proofed brains. A randomized placebo-controlled study cited in Nutrition Journal found that test subjects taking just 3 grams of fish oil per day for 5 weeks significantly improved cognitive performance compared to folks taking a placebo directly. We got the data, 99% of the evidence on omega-3s and where to get the DHA and EPA. Fish oil is what's tested. Think about what kids need. Like, what do their developing brains need? Well, they need fats, they need proteins, they need vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin K, vitamin E, calcium, vitamin B12, vitamin A, iron, zinc. We can get that through food. Obviously, you can give your child vitamins, whatever you want to do with that, but we can do it through food, and our school systems are not feeding our kids the right foods. You're probably wondering, like, what does this have to do with any of these conditions that you just talked about? What does this have to do with our school system? What does this have to do with anything you've just said? Well, if we have a brain that is not getting the nutrients it needs, is that going to lead to developmental disorders? Is that going to lead to mental disorders, to behavioral disorders? Yeah, probably. I mean, your brain is literally the thing that helps everything function, right? So if your brain is not getting the nutrients it needs, it's going to cause a lot of problems. And there are a lot of controversial doctors out there right now that are studying things like ADHD, ADD, autism, ODD, language deficit disorders, like all of the above, which are deemed like neurological disorders, right? And a lot of them are finding that they can actually help these kids and like help them get better. They can actually help them via diet, via certain exercises, because if you haven't listened to my podcast, I have talked about the importance of like the inner ear and the development of the inner ear and things like that. So there's so many different aspects that obviously play a role, but is this why are we such an unhealthy society in nutrients? Is this why we are seeing that, student misconduct and disruptions in classrooms is up 56%? Is this why we're seeing rowdiness, 49%, disrespect, 48%? I mean, it's so overwhelming, and our obesity rates are so high in children now, and they have such a sedentary lifestyle. I mean, we actually went to like this movie theater that was like, I don't even know, it was like a quarter of a mile from our school. So we just walked. It was a beautiful, it was like April or May. So it was beautiful. We were walking and the kids could not do it. Like they were struggling. Like they were just like, oh, when are we going to get there? This is so far. And I'm like, we are literally walking a quarter of a mile. Like you can't even walk a quarter of a mile. Like we are in a weird time right now where kids and adults alike are the unhealthiest that we have ever been. And we have to take that into account. What does this have to do with our school system? I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have allowed bad research to just seep in. Bad research on how to teach kids to read, bad research on what we should feed our kids, just a whole myriad of things, okay? So something I want to talk about too is the way that we are parenting these days as well, because you kind of can see like there's like a shift in the way that people are parenting and things like that. And one thing I see a lot with my students, or did see a lot with my students, was doing hard things was really hard for them. Like it's like they had never had to do something hard before. And when we're looking at what helps a human thrive or fill purpose or whatever it is, you have to do hard things. That is where growth happens. If you can't do hard things, life is just full of hard things. And we're kind of in a society where we're just stuck in this comfort zone, and it's not good for us. We have to do things that are hard. We have to feed our bodies the right nutrients. We have to look at these kids in a whole aspect. I feel like we kind of look at things in like little tidbits of like reading and math and nutrition and this and that. And we kind of just like break them apart into these like subcategories. But if we looked at it as a whole, I think it would help us to actually get to the root and to like identify what we could do to actually help fix the systems or fix these problems. But we don't. We just kind of have each of these own little realms when really we need to look at it in a whole way, right? So I'm actually going to show you a video. It is from the Huberman Lab. Her name is Dr. Becky Kennedy. She's amazing. She does a lot of stuff on parenting and improving relationships and all kinds of stuff.
I think about this like when our kids are especially young and they're building this circuitry around like, what does it mean to get success? Like, what are my expectations there? How much effort do I have to put in? And I think about like a young kid, playing some mindless, just dopamine giving game. The circuit they learn is like mindlessness, zero effort, dopamine. And then I think, and I find this really interesting, like how many people say like their kid is 6 now, having a really hard time learning how to read. And they're getting all these learning assessments, and the learning assessments are coming back, like no dyslexia, right? And I know some of these families, I say this with love, is I literally think this is the first time in this kid's life that they kind of have to put like concerted effort without, in the moment, success.
I saw this as an educator and I was just like, yes, Dr. Becky Kennedy, like, thank you for saying this, because I saw this with my students is where I would have them like teaching them to read or teaching them a new math concept. And as soon as it got hard, the crocodile tears, the I can't do it, I don't want to do it. This is, they couldn't do it. They could not work through that because I don't think that they had done hard things before. They have not worked through, oh, I'm frustrated. Oh, well, usually if I'm frustrated, my problem just gets solved. I cry and then it's over with and I don't have to feel that way anymore. In the real world, when we are learning new things, you do not get that instant gratification. It is so delayed. So when you're learning to read, it's going to take you weeks, maybe months. To become a fluent reader, it might take you months and months and months and months. And kids are so used to just getting that instant gratification. I only had to be frustrated for this split second. They are not in their executive functioning. They are usually in their primitive or emotional functioning. And as the adult, you have to help them to get to that executive functioning out of the emotional state, right? So there's so many things you have to do, and you have to teach this to your child, but there's no opportunity for them to learn it when our technology is literally just, it is created for dopamine hit after dopamine hit after dopamine hit. So we're looking at the nutrients. The technology is giving these dopamine hits, this lack of delayed gratification. They just get what they want, what they need, when they need it, when they want it, right? And so I think it's important, and I do say this with so much love. Like, I'm not trying to just like hound people and be like, you suck. Like, that's not the point of this. But I think that we have to start looking at it at an individual aspect, right? It starts with you individually. It's not going to be something that the government's going to come and fix for you, or this person's going to fix for you. Everything starts with us. We have to go back to, how are we feeding ourselves? How are we exercising? What is our lifestyle like? Can I sit in frustration as an adult? Can I learn new things? Maybe as a model for your child, you learn something new and you show them that frustration that you feel so that they can see that it's normal. You work with them through that frustration. You talk about it, right? Like, it starts with you and what you're doing, and that will trickle down to your child. Now I'm going to kind of go into, all right, our school system is failing because 68% of fourth graders can't read. It was like 69% of fourth graders can't do basic math. Like, it's a sad state of affairs that we're in right now. Dr. Phil is talking about what he thinks is happening. And this is actually on the Modern Wisdom podcast with Chris Williamson, also another amazing podcast. But we're going to watch a video, and he is talking about why he thinks that our kids can't read. So let's take a listen.
If we can't at least get these kids reading, we're in a lot of trouble educationally in this country. And it doesn't seem like anybody's got a good plan to do anything about it, because it's being acknowledged kind of superficially, but nobody does anything about it.
Well, kids are going to school, unless there's some secret attendance rate changes that I've not seen. Kids are attending, from whatever it is, 9 a.m. until 3:30 p.m. They are in classrooms with a teacher, and the teacher is saying things to them. I don't understand what is happening if basic reading and maths competence isn't being met.
So I think it's kind of funny that he talks about how, like, if our kids can't read, then we have a serious problem on our hands. And it is so true, because when you actually look at statistics, it's actually it is really sad, and it's hard to think like, no, that's not true. That's not true. It's true. If your child cannot read by the end of fourth grade, it's like, I don't even know, like a 10x of like dropping out of high school. They have like 2/3 of kids that cannot read by the time they leave fourth grade are either going to end up on welfare or within the juvenile court system. Like, reading is so important, just as math is, right? Like, those are the two things. If you need to be able to communicate, you need to be able to critically think, problem solve, you need to be able to read, you need to be able to do math. Those are like the basics of what you have to be able to do to be a functioning adult in our society. And right now we are not setting our kids up for that. So then he's like, well, we don't have a plan. So I want to read you something. This is from Dan Coe. It's actually from his book called The Art of Focus. I'm convinced that the future of schooling will be done online with creators as teachers, and each student can join the school that aligns the most with their interests, values, and preferred method of learning. Schools are trying so hard to differentiate. They are trying so hard to do this personalized learning movement. How? Okay, I was in a district for a while that was all about personalized learning. It is not possible when you are one freaking human with no aides, or maybe one aide for like an hour a day. How can I personalize the learning for 24 kids that can range anywhere from kindergarten level to a fourth grade level? How in the world, as one human, do you do this, especially when the children are so young and they can't, like, it's just impossible for them to really do the learning on their own. Like, I'm talking elementary age, like kindergarten to third grade, like, it's really hard to get them to do their learning on their own, right? They need a guide. They need some structure. How do you do that? Like, it's impossible. I tried, I promise. And I spent a lot of extra time trying to do this, and it's really hard to do. And so they're trying to do this, but yet not providing support to teachers to actually do it. Like, if you want me to do a personalized learning, that's fantastic. I would love to do that. That would be the way that I would like to do it. Let's do it by skill, not by age. Let's do it. You don't need 8 hours to teach a kid how to read or do, arithmetic or write or whatever. You don't have to have 8 hours to do that. Okay. So much of your day is wasted just on classroom management. It's insane. Okay. So yeah, if you could give me 5, 6 kids, heck yeah, I could do personalized learning so easy. Okay. But when you give me 24, how? Like, it's literally impossible. And the really funny thing is, we got all this money for COVID, right? We get all this money, we get extra aids, we get extra, resources, we get all these extra things, right? Because, oh no, it was the pandemic. That's why they can't do X, Y, and Z. So we've got to catch them up, and we're going to give you more aids, and we're going to give you more resources. We're going to do smaller class sizes. Then they say, no more COVID funding. So guess what's happening right now? I've actually talked to some teachers about it, and I knew this was what was going to happen, is bigger class sizes. Guess what? We don't have funding now. So now we're going to X out all these teachers or transfer them here. You better bet next year your class sizes are going to be bigger. We just don't have the funding. And then you look at how districts spend their money, and you're like, weird. Superintendents getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. The schools are pretty much crap. Like, I mean, seriously, like you walk into some of our schools and I'm like, really? We still have carpet from the 80s? Like, what is happening? Like, you have not done anything to the school since the 1800s. Like, what is happening? Right. And then you have them remodeling district offices. So it's like, do we not have the funding? Is it for the kids? No, like I said, their actions and their words are very, very different. I agree with him. The future of schooling should be done in a individualized matter. And I actually think this is going to help with the behaviors we're seeing, right? Because some of the reason that kids act out is because they're either bored, because they're way smart and like, this is boring, I don't want to be here. Like, I wouldn't want to either. Or they're so far behind that they're like, well, I know if I act out, I get to leave and I don't have to do this hard thing that I'm super behind and it's embarrassing and I don't want my peers to know I'm behind, right? So they're acting out just to get out of the situation, and it works. It does. And sometimes they even get rewarded for it. Like, here's a sucker. So sorry, like whatever. Like, so what is the solution? The solution is that you have to take the power back as a parent. And if you want your child to have a personalized education, it's not going to happen in the public school system. Okay. It's just not. If you want your child to learn with or go to a school that aligns most with their interests and their values and their preferred method of learning, you're going to have to find it. And the good thing about the internet today is that there are so many teachers out there like myself that are creating alternative systems where you can choose your teacher. You can choose the person that aligns with your values, your beliefs, your preferred method of learning, or whatever it is. That is an option now. It's not the easiest option. Would I say sending your kid to public school is the easiest option? Yes, it is. And I get parents' work. I get that right now, because of our economics and our inflation and all of that, like one income households don't exist very often anymore. It is almost next to impossible to have a one income household. And I totally get that, right? But it's so important that we look at that and what is best for our children. And sometimes taking the path that's not as taken is going to be the best path for your child, right? So I have courses for parents that teaches you what you need to know about our language, about how to actually teach kids to read. That's actually successful. I started implementing that in my last couple of years of teaching. Not balanced literacy, it's the body of science, the science of reading, and it really dives into our language and understanding our language and teaching reading in a way that is actually brain friendly. And that is what I do that's what my course teaches you, because curriculums, I know this as a teacher, I've seen many curriculums and they still are not perfect. No curriculum is perfect. That's really just the thing. So if you're following a curriculum, and you want to just make sure that like, okay, I want to make sure that I understand the language, because one, it'll make it easier for you to teach your kid to read and write if you understand it. And two, you can make sure that you're supplementing whatever it is that your curriculum does not have, right? So I created something for you. And then I also am coming out with a course for kids to teach them to read and write with games, movement, songs, and so on. That aligns with that body of science. So like he said, the future of schooling is online, right? We can do that now. It's so simple to find a program that works for your child. Really, there's so many out there. So now let's go to Dr. Phil, and he starts to talk about curriculum companies, and it's so funny, and I'll tell you the story in just a second, but let's take a listen.
These school systems have adopted programs of teaching subject matters that just simply didn't work. And there was no empirical data to suggest that it would work. But yet they spent millions and millions of dollars on these teaching programs that just simply don't work. But they've embraced them. They've spent money on them. They put time into them, but they're not yielding the results.
What are these programs? What are they?
Well, they're programs that they buy commercially. Somebody comes up and they said, okay, we're gonna take this approach to teaching reading, whether it's phonetics here, or it's another word structure here, or it's a math approach here. And you have to look at this stuff to see, okay, we have a competency level when we start, then you get to the other end. How much competency have they gained? How much have they mastered the subject matter? And if it's if it's not a substantial increase, then they need to do something different. And when you talk about Illinois and they're using the state test and it's not showing competency with these kids, you can't continue to do the same thing. And, there are a lot of these programs out there that just simply aren't showing competency from state to state. And they need to change. They need to do something different.
Okay, he is so right on the curriculum thing. So it's so funny because districts will spend like millions of dollars on this curriculum. And by the way, the Board of Education has to it's like an approved list of these are the curriculums that you have to choose from. Anyhow, so it's not like teachers really get that big of a say of like which curriculum they're using. They really don't. Like they just get told this is the curriculum you're using and good luck, have fun. Here's some trainings on how you use it or whatever, or maybe no trainings at all. Just figure it out, right? So it's so funny because he's like, and he even talks about how we don't even have there's no objective evidence that these curriculums even work. But straight up out of people's mouths, and you can even look this up, there are so many teachers calling this out. They're like, well, we bought this curriculum. It doesn't really align with the science of reading, but we signed a 6-year contract or a 5-year contract or a 3-year contract or whatever, and we spent millions of dollars. So we're just going to make it work for those 3 years. And then you as the teacher, if it doesn't align, then you're just going to have to supplement. And so then teachers are spending countless hours trying to find resources that they can then, supplement for the curriculum. And they're probably spending their own money. Sometimes they'll allow it, but there's a lot of districts now that are like, you can't spend money on teachers, pay teachers. We will not fund that because apparently teachers that are actually teaching the kids that are creating these resources don't know what's going to work for kids, but these curriculums that don't actually objectively work. Anywho, riddle me that. I don't know. Anywho, but it is so funny. Like I said, the bureaucracy of it, right? They spent millions of dollars on it. So they're like, well, even though it doesn't work, we spent too much money on it. So we're not going to switch, not until after, so it's like I said, the bureaucracy, the way we spend our money, it's really insane. If educators were the ones that were like, okay, this is if it was a bottom up approach where teachers were like, this is so we have this much money and this is where we need to spend it. And we actually talk about well, this curriculum's not working. I can see it's not working objectively, right? If we get the right kind of data and you can say objectively, this is not working, just as balanced literacy, I objectively can say it does not work. I was that teacher that was teaching balanced literacy because that was what the curriculum provided me. That is what the universities taught me. And I objectively could say, as a teacher, I will say this, as a teacher, you, especially when you're new, you're looking at data. You look at data as far as reading scores, and you base this off of state tests and things like that. And that's kind of where we're getting our data. At least that's how we got it in one district. And anywho, so you're looking at this data and you come together as a first grade team or second grade team or as a whole school or whatever. And you're looking at the data of okay, can our kids read? Can they do math? What should we change? What can we do? Whatever. We do discuss these things. But when you are new to teaching and you're coming to these meetings and you're looking at your data alongside your teammates' data and you're like, well, my kids aren't, only 60% of my kids are, right there on grade level, barely hanging on for dear life or above, or, and I have 40% that still can't, but it's really similar to the teacher next to me. So maybe I'm not doing something wrong. Maybe this is just how it is. As a new teacher, you're so in the dark. And then if you are like me and you're I can't accept that. I can't accept that there's still this huge chunk of kids that can't read. What the heck's going on? And why is all the data the same? Maybe one person has maybe 1% more growth than I do or whatever. And I ask them what they're doing and it's what I'm doing. So I'm oh, well, I don't get it. I'm doing that same thing, right? That's when you do your own research and then you find out oh my gosh, maybe I should try this or try that. And you start pretty much doing your own research, right? And you start implementing it with your students. And then you start to see, well, okay, this worked, this didn't work. This worked, this didn't work, right? And you start doing your own research on that. But like I said, with curriculums, it's so funny. The districts just won't buy new curriculums until their contract's up because they spent millions of dollars. So they're well, that's too bad for you. So sad, right? How is that the way that how is that the norm of how we treat these kids? So like I had said, it's kind of the definition of insanity. You're doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a better result. And well, we're not objectively getting a better result, but yeah, we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's where is this disconnect? What is happening? And there are so many teachers out there. Yes, majority still use balanced literacy. I think some of it has to do with the fact that they just don't know. Like, if you know better, you do better. Like, it's not like teachers are out there trying to make sure that kids can't read and do math and write and so on. Like, no, teachers freaking care with every ounce of their being. Like, they want their students to succeed. And it breaks your heart when you can see the kids are not succeeding. And when you realize, like, oh my gosh, it's me. Like, I'm the problem. It's not these kids. Like, I'm not using best practices. It really breaks your heart. And it's so funny when he's like, it's objectively showing that it's not working. Like, why is it not changing? It's the bureaucracy of the whole system. And that is why it's not changing, really, if we're getting down to it, right? District that I actually left, we were number 1 in our state for K-3 literacy scores. And that was because we adopted the science of reading approach, and we did not teach curriculums to fidelity. And it really showed. My district was all of the schools in my district are Title I and so on. And so we really, like, the Board of Education was like, what the heck are you guys doing? Like, you guys are beating out these like very high income like schools and stuff. Like, we had very high ESL numbers and all kinds of things. So it was crazy for them that we were succeeding in the way we were. But when you can do these best practices, it is helpful for your child, right? So let's look at, like, okay, people like to give homeschooled people like a lot of crap. And also the state is coming after homeschool parents, which is insane. Like, because you homeschool your kids, they have to like come and like check in on you because there has been abuse or neglect or whatever, like in a very small percentage, right, of homeschooled kids and whatever. So now they're like, we've got to check everyone. Anywho, but like, how are they doing? They always, like, people, even educators, like, they don't love when people are like, I'm going to homeschool. They're like, okay, like, your kid's not going to learn anything. But when we look at it as like, well, public school is a one size fits all. And if you homeschool, you can actually do a personalized type of learning, and you're not going to be learning for 8 hours a day. Like, depending on your child's age, you might spend, like, up to high school is like 2 hours max in high school. Okay. So when you have a really young kid, it's like 30 minutes max, then 60 minutes max. Like, it's not that much time spent learning everything they need to learn. So how are homeschoolers doing? This is actually the most comical post I've ever seen, because the number one thing people say with homeschooling is like, they're not going to be socialized. And it's like, well, yeah, they are. It says Canadian study finds that homeschooled kids are smarter than public school students. This is from Business Insider. The largest study that was done in Canada to date found that homeschooling students on average scored at the 80th percentile in reading, at the 76th percentile in language, and the 79th percentile in mathematics. The Canadian average for all public and privately educated students is the 50th percentile. So they're kicking butt, okay? And so it just kind of goes on to say that, like, homeschool children achieve levels of academic achievement similar to or higher than their publicly schooled peers. And then they go in to talk about social skills rating, and that homeschool students also revealed higher social skills as measured by the social skills rating system, and that homeschool children's problem behaviors were actually lower than that of the standardized population. So as an educator, I can tell you the reason that probably is because they get that personalized instruction from their parent. So they're getting what they need when they need it. They are actually participating in the real world, because I can tell you that if you think your kid's going to get socialization at school, I urge you to go sub. I urge you to go be an aide. Just go hang out in the classroom for a while. Not much socialization is happening in the real world sense. Okay, so that I feel like is a myth. And then also you have more control. I mean, obviously you can send your kid to school with lunch, right? So you can control what they're eating and whatever. But if you want to control the environment in which your child is in, homeschool is really how you do that. And like I said, because there are so many different options, it's so easy to homeschool your kid now, right? Like, there's so many programs, so many teachers out there creating their own content, creating their own schools or their own micro schools. And so you can really choose like which one fits your kid's needs the best, right? What is our solution? Like, okay, technology, like, should we maybe look at the kind of technology our children are on? Nutrients. Are they getting the right kind of nutrients? Do they go outside and play, or are they active, right? Are they more sedentary? Get them moving. That is important for us as humans. And are they getting proper instruction in reading and math, right? Like I said, all of these things where we're seeing an uptick in mental and behavioral and developmental disorders, we're seeing an uptick in behavioral problems at school. We are seeing all of these things, and I think it all has to do with all of the above. And the most comical thing is, if you watch the State of the Union, Biden talks about how our solution to the problem is more school, more of the stuff that isn't working. He says, listen, now we've got to get preschool. We got to get them in there at 3 years old. If, he talks about some study of, if your kid goes to preschool, they actually are, they have more academic achievement in reading and math and so on. And we're not even successful right now. Like, I don't care if you send your 3-year-old to a preschool, like even there are a lot of kids in the school system that went to preschool and still 68 or 69 or whatever, 68% of fourth graders are not reading on grade level. So I feel like that's a moot point. Like, more schooling is not the answer. I think a more individualized schooling, looking at the food we're eating, looking at the technology use and the type of technology we're using, because there is a difference from, a mindless game to something that's like an academic, critically thinking, problem solving type of thing where it's not instant dopamine hits all the time and they're learning something, right? That's different. When we're looking at our lifestyles, like, there are so many things, but I don't believe that having more schooling is the answer. Also, one more resource that I do suggest as well, if you don't follow them, they're called Superhero Foods. You can find them on Instagram, but they also have children's books that talk about a healthy lifestyle and avoiding seed oils, and talking about our superfoods, which are going to be protein and fat and minerals and things like that. So they also have children's books that help to tell your children about like why we need to eat healthy and why it's good for our brains and our bodies and our muscles and all of that good stuff. And then, as well as, like I said, Sean Stevenson's Eat Smarter, great book if you want to listen to that. And then he also has a cookbook, like a family cookbook, so that you can make sure that you are providing your child with the nutrients they need, right? So like I had said, the internet is amazing because we have all these problems, but really, if we look at it at the individual sense, right, and we take our power back and we look at what we're doing at the individual level, I think that all of these problems that we are seeing are going to be fixed, but we kind of have to create an alternative system or an alternative space where our kids' needs are being met, and that everything that we are doing is for the best, for our kids, right? And so I know this was a very long-winded podcast, and I kind of went all over the map with it, because really, when we look at like what is going on with why can't kids read, why is our school system failing, why are more kids being diagnosed with these disorders, you have to look at it in so many different avenues. Like, it's such a complex issue that we have to look at like all the above. And also, I didn't talk about this because I'll let people way smarter than me talk about this, but economics also plays such a freaking large role in all of this as well. Because you have Kellogg's saying, like the CEO of Kellogg's saying, like, so sorry, peasants, like, you can't afford your food, eat cereal. It's a great way to get zinc, which is such a lie, but anywho. So when we look at economics, we look at inflation, we look at what's, how the government's spending their money. We look at how the school system, which is really an arm of the government, is spending their money. If you look at their actions instead of their words, it's kind of something that, I believe I will be taking my children's education into my own hands. I will be taking a lot of this stuff into my own hands because we have the internet. You can learn so many things. You can become a professional in this. You can teach your children to read, write, do arithmetic. Obviously, homeschooled kids are doing better than public schooled kids. Like, you can do this. You can change your lifestyle, and it will drastically affect your child's lifestyle, but it all starts with us. So I hope that this was not too rambly and confusing, because I went in so many different directions, but I hope really that it just empowers you to take all of that responsibility and like put it on yourself, because we can't sit there and think that somebody else is going to solve our problems, because that's really not the case, right? The only person that can solve our problems is going to be us. And then there will be a ripple effect, right? So I just hope that this podcast was kind of eye-opening to you in how our public education system works, an educator's view on what I think is happening, and just giving you kind of different information that you can digest, but don't take my word for it. Go do your own research. It's so important that you don't just mindlessly listen to people on the internet, right? So go do your own research. And I hope that you feel empowered from this podcast and you go and take even just one action step to make a healthier and better life for yourself and your children.